Hello, this is uh, a little introductory class to using Blender, particularly for upscaling or refitting, as it should be called, or mashups. Um, so it's not exactly a step-by-step guide. I'm going to try to cover what the process is supposed to be in like broad strokes, but mostly so people that have no familiarity with Blender and text tools can uh, ideally follow guides that have a lot of information in them. So this is like the disclaimer. This guide slash class is not going to show how to use any dev kits because I am particularly against uh, teaching someone to use a dev kit from the get-go. I think that dev kits are some of them specifically are very particular, and it's very good to learn how to use them, but I think that first you need to have like a grasp of how things work in order to really take advantage of a dev kit. So this is like basically the vanilla way of doing things, trying to keep it as simple as possible so the information is easy to digest. And just keep in mind that everyone does things very differently. Everyone has their own workflow. So I recommend that you try to read as many guides as you can, because it's really um, like everyone's process can be so different sometimes, and you can find whatever things work best for your own way of working and processing information, and you can pick and choose. You can be like, oh, this method for this thing makes things easier, or this seems a lot more efficient, so I'll do that instead. So, 100% recommend learning from as many people as possible, and not exclusively from Final Fantasy XIV modders. Please do yourself a favor and actually use YouTube and Google as much as you can whenever you want to learn how to do something better, because there are so many things that you can learn from so many different people. Um, Now, uh, we're going to start with the process by opening Textools 3.0. Since first we only want to grab the items that we want to use, we're going to here do in the transaction status, we're going to do prepare transaction, because we are not really going to do anything with these files except export models. So I do this and I can close the window. Transactions are a bit of like a complicated thing to explain to newbies. But basically, all you need to know is that transactions help you make the different processes that you want to do in Textools without overwriting your files. So usually you want to have a transaction either prepared or just begin a transaction. Whenever you have Textools ready, you're going to import Modpacks. And first you want the body that you are going to use. For this particular case, I'm going to do TBSE, but and actually, I let me make sure that I installed. There's going to be not safe for work stuff here, obviously. Um, but basically, you're going to import whatever body you want. I will mention a few things about the main three that most people use. So TBSE, Bebo, and HR3. Um, kind of covering a couple of the differences, but again, very broad strokes. So once you install the body, you want to find how it, where it's installed. So here in the item list search bar, you can type in small clothes or the emperor's new robes, and you'll find here that we have it separated by body, hands, legs, and feet. You can put them all together if you want, but I find it a little bit easier to have them separated like they are already. So here I have my TBSE chest. And the main differences that you need to keep in mind is what model they replace. So, for example, most male bodies are going to replace the Midlander based bodies. So, TBSE replaces the Midlander male, and then if you look here, you'll see what the different models actually are. You have the Midlander female, the Highlander male, that it has its own chest model, and that's why sometimes you cannot find things that are compatible with Highlanders. Rogadin, and of course Lalafels. So we only have the Midlander chest because the Viera, Mikote, Aura, etc. share the same chest. The only difference is that they have different scaling, usually around the hips or the shoulders or things like that. So you can just work on the Midlander male body, and then everything, when you finish your upscale, it's going to resize itself properly to the scaling of the other races. The same happens with the Midlander female, but Midlander female, at least it's a lot more, it covers a lot more bodies. All the tall females are based on Midlander female, just with different scaling. And in a lot of cases, particularly the chest of the Highlanders is going to be different. Rogadin is, you can notice that it's here, but there is no Hrothgar, because really Hrothgar and Rogadin share the same model. The only thing that's not visible here is that the Rogadin is covered in the different fur for the Hrothgar, and in the Rogadin model, the fur is not visible. But once you bring it into Blender, you'll be able to see it. So as long as you install it as Rogadin and you don't change any of the fur patterns and everything, it's going to apply to both Rogadin and Hrothgar. The other thing that you need to keep in mind is the numbers that they replace. Usually because when you're assigning things, you will probably want to double check what number it is. So for example, Midlander male is usually 0101, right? So whenever I am working with modpacks or things like that, and I need to select a model, you have MDL for model here, I make sure that I am working on the 101, because those are the Midlander male numbers. And Midlander female, you have 0201, right? So all of the Midlander female stuff is always going to be this number. Highlander is going to be 301. Rogat in male is 901. And if you are not sure what the other numbers are, if you are working on a specific race or something, you can go here to this hamburger menu, edit the metadata, and just enable what model you want to see. Just click it, check, and save to TX. And after you do that, like if I want to see adolescent female, I save it. And then when I come to the models again, now I'll have adolescent female model, and you can see that it's scaled as the model as well. However, there are a couple of tricky things about working on a specific model. Like if you are like, I only want to make my clothes for a female Ellison, you might find some issues here and there. So if you want to start with as little issues as possible, I would recommend just working with the base bodies. And after you kind of have a grasp for it, then you can start like messing around with more specific things. At least in my experience, that facilitates stuff. So, well, once you have your model, you want to save it as an FBX. So you're going to save it here, and you have a little folder with the information of the body, and particularly the small clothes of the body, which is usually referencing the chest. And the 3D models, I have a few of this already saved. So name it whatever you want. And then I recommend saving or well copying the address of the file, because it's a little bit easier to find it that way. And once you are here in Blender, by the way, I'm using 4.0 because I find that 4.0 is the most recent version that doesn't have a bunch of bugs. So just keep that in mind. Don't use 4.1. 4.1 has been giving people issues when importing and exporting models. 3.6 is okay to use, but you might find some differences in the UI and some of the things that I use and find. So just keep it in mind. I cannot really help if you're not using the same version as I am. Well, anyway, so first, as you saw, I just deleted everything that I had here. The camera, the cube, all of that, I don't need it, so I can just click and drag, select it, and delete it. Now, I am going to go into File, Import, and I'm going to select FBX. So I can here input the folder where I was saving this for, and I bring the chest. So here you're going to see how things are set up when you import a model. Usually you have this object, and it tells you usually the number of groups that you have. In this case, because it's just skin, the groups in Blender and in Textools are what we separate the textures for. So the skin textures is going to be just one group. The clothes are probably going to be another group. And if it's a very detailed mesh with a lot of textures, it probably will have multiple groups just for the clothes, right? But in this case, we're only working with the chest. So with these chest, I only have one group. And then you have the end root. The end root is basically your skeleton. So you can see these funny little figures are the skeleton of this body. You need to be careful when you are exporting things and making sure that the skeleton that you have corresponds with whatever you're going to upscale or import. If you have a skeleton that has like I'm thinking of certain objects, certain clothes that have maybe like a high collar, or it has like a cape or something like that. Those type of clothes are going to have special bones. So make sure that they correspond with the stuff that you want to animate. You need to slowly get familiarized with what the additional bones look like. And well, after here, the end root, um, I have the information about the bones that I don't really need. And then I have the mesh, plural meshes, for the body, right? So the body is cut into different parts because the models in Final Fantasy XIV work like Lego. So I need to be able to separate certain things so I can make room for gloves, for example. So if I use short gloves, it's very likely that this part will disappear or be deleted in the game through some of the attribute information, and it's going to be replaced with another wrist that already has gloves, right? Or if I'm using long gloves, this part is not going to be used, it's going to be removed, and then this is going to occupy another wrist and an elbow that are actually covered with gloves. Similar things, the neck needs to be separated as well. So usually this is how we want to keep a body. The female body, the Rogatine body are also going to be separated in these different ways. Now, right now, and usually when you use Blender, it starts by being in solid mode, which means that you don't really see the color of the textures. So I'm going to change here into material preview mode. And now I can see the color better. Something that is important to keep in mind is that this color of your texture, and even just very quickly, let me show you what the textures look like here. The textures that Blender is going to show you are not the actual files that you have in Textools. They are like approximations of the textures based on the model that Blender is using just to render everything here and show it to you. So if you have a visual problem in the model and you export the FBX, it will show in Blender as well. This is not as relevant for clothes, for example, but for when I save this model, it's going to save an approximation of these textures, but these are not the actual textures that are here, right? These will look different in Textools. So just keep it in mind, like Blender is just imitating the texture so you can visualize stuff, but that's about it. So I'm going to bring in something that maybe I had already, sorry, let me get rid of these areas. So when I have my model like this for the skin, it usually doesn't have any issues, but if you're working with a face or hair, or in this case, clothes, I think, okay. So let's say that I have this dress that it's already TBS-E compatible. I think maybe as a better example, I'll change the chest that I'm using here. So forgive me from just removing things here for explanation's sake. I'll use um, a lava body for this. So I have a female chest. I'm going to lava chest, and I have this dress. If I am trying to upscale something, that means that I am not going to use the chest that the dress came with. And I can see that I have my group 0, 0.0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, but these are all group 0. And then I have my group 1.0, which is the actual dress. This will vary. I think that for the majority of male models, the skin will always be the 0 group, and the clothes will be the group 1. I believe that with most, well, with a lot of vanilla female bodies, this changes around, but it's not super important. So if you see here, I can see that I have the bones again, and they're kind of like, I cannot tell which are the bones for the body that I was using and which one is for the dress and stuff. So right now I'm just going to go here and turn off the bones so I can work a little bit easier. And if you notice that your textures look strange, I don't think that is a particular case of this mesh, but usually a lot of clothes come with transparency stuff that is not well visualized in Blender sometimes. So in order to fix that, you go into this red circle that says Material Properties, and you find the settings that say blend mode alpha blend, and you change it to alpha clip, or in some cases alpha hashed, depending on what type of transparency you have and what looks better. So for my particular case, it's not necessary, but you can just go select each part of a group, in this case the group 1.0, change it to alpha clip, and all the other additional parts, because this is how we call them parts, are going to be changed. So group 1 part 0 is done, and we don't have any more parts, so this is fine. Now I have deleted the main body, and now I have my new body already here for the chest. These numbers that you see right now are not what I want to use, because usually we start from 0, right? So 0.4, I want it to be 0.0. So group 0 part 5, I want it to be group 0 part 1. Group 0 part 6, I make it group 0.2. And group 0 part 7, I change it to 3. And very quickly, I know that this might seem silly, but just so you know that it doesn't matter what this is called. Like, you can rename things if you want. Like, this is like elbow, because I don't want to forget. Or this is the neck. And The only thing is that you need to make sure that you don't touch the numbers, but everything else can be renamed if you double click on it. This can be very helpful if you have a lot of meshes and you cannot make tails or heads of what the hell is going on. And if you are wondering how this shows in Textools, for example, with this model, I can here click Edit Model to visualize things. And here it says Group 0, Part 0. Right? So Group 0, Part 0, Group 0, Part 1. It says that it has an attribute elbow, so it means that it's the elbow part of the mesh. And then you have Group 1, Group 1, Part 0, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. These attributes here are the things that tells the game to disappear body parts in order to replace them with gloves or shoes or necklaces and stuff like that. So that's why the numbers and the parts are important, because that way you know which one is supposed to have which attribute for the wrist, for the neck, for the elbow, and etc. So this is how you find that. Now, for this particular model, since I want to upscale things, there are a few ways to do this. And like I said, this is like the most basic and the specific way that I learned how to do it. So it doesn't always have to be done this way. But since we said that we have the end root are our skeletons, right? So currently we have 2 skeletons. And if you're working with clothes, you want the chest and the clothes to use the same skeleton. You cannot use the different skeletons for this. So we're going to move the dress down here to the other end root. But in order to do that, I need to press Shift. And in order for things not to get switched around, I'm also going to press Alt. So once I do that, my dress is now here in the with the end root, and it's a little bit easier to keep track of it. If I fail to do this with the Shift and the Alt, well, first of all, if you just want to bring it down like this, it's not going to do anything. Like, you cannot move it around like this into the end root. You need to press Shift in order to make this available. But once you do that, usually it switches, well, it moves the clothes into the axis and puts things on the floor. So this is easily fixable because you can just go here into the little square, orange square, and change the rotation X 90 degrees. But this is something that requires additional steps, and it's a little bit annoying, especially if you have many parts. So that's why when we bring it down to the end root, we also press Alt, and it saves us the steps of rotating clothes into the ground. Now that everything is here, I also need to make sure that while I'm selecting the dress, I go here into the modifiers. The modifiers in Blender do a lot of different things, but usually the one that you have to worry about and make sure that you always have is the modifier for the armature, which is another word for the skeleton. So in here you can see that you have a name here, and then you have object with another name. Usually this particular thing is just for you to like recognize that it's an armature modifier. Ignore these number. This usually doesn't matter. It's just armature basically. But the object is the one that matters. So you can see that the dress currently still has assigned the end root that it originally had. But if you, the end root that we want to use is the one that doesn't have any numbers in it. And if you look at the chest modifiers, you also have assigned end root to it without the 001. So we'll make sure that the dress also has the object for end root without numbers. So now it corresponds. Now we're telling Blender, you all the animation and weights and things that have anything to do with moving this piece of clothing, it's according to this specific skeleton, right? Afterwards, you can just delete these this other object. You're not going to need it anymore. So usually what I do is just right click and do delete hierarchy, and it deletes the whole thing quickly. So once you got your body and once you have your clothes, there are a couple things to keep in mind. This dress is a custom mesh that someone made. It is not vanilla. So if you look at it in edit mode, which you can do by pressing the tab button or changing here edit mode or object mode, the difference between object mode and edit mode in Blender is always going to be very important. So if you're trying to do a step and you cannot make it work, check if you are in object mode or in edit mode, because sometimes that's what actually going to make the difference. But well, in edit mode, I can see that this has a lot of vertices, a lot of polygons, because it's a mesh that someone made. Yes. And usually these type of meshes are really easy to work with because they have a lot of vertices, and usually they already have back faces figured out. I'm going to try to make a video that it's only for back faces, but just as a very bare bones explanation, the way that video games render objects is they give you one face of the mesh, right? Because you don't usually need to look inside the mesh. So in order to preview this, there are a couple ways of doing it. I think the best one or the easiest one to visualize is here in the here in the show in the overlays. We're going to open here and do face orientation. So this is something that I couldn't use anymore in 4.2 for some reason. Well, it wasn't working exactly the same, but at least in 4.0 and 3.6 it still works the same. You can see that here everything is blue because this is one way that the faces of the meshes are looking or facing, right? And you can see that there is red in the inside because this is usually not being shown or not being rendered in solid mode, or when I change to solid mode. If I open this little menu over here, there is something called backface culling. So if I turn this on, you will see how this would look in the game, which is the inside is basically transparent and the outside is solid. So if I want to look inside the mesh, it's going to be transparent because that's we're only rendering one side of the mesh. usually this doesn't matter, right? Because you don't want to look into the inside of the clothes. But then you have things like this dress where you can probably see the legs and you can see what's behind the legs. So in that case, it's necessary to create other set of back faces that are pointing the other way. So with the example of the face orientation again, right? If I wanted to select everything here and do mesh, normals, flip, you can see that now everything is transparent from the outside. And if I look in, now I can see the actual solid part of the mesh. So if you are having trouble with things disappearing, it is probably because of the face orientation. And you always want to make sure that the faces that are or I should say that your whole mesh is blue, because that means, or well, because I have backface culling, yes, that everything is blue, because if you see something red, that means that the inward side of the faces are showing, and that's not what you want, right? So this is how it's supposed to look, and for the most part, it's not going to cause issues. If you open, actually, I can demonstrate it here. It's possible that you open a mod by someone else, right? And you say, oh, I'm going to upscale this. And when you open the mod, this is what it looks like. It's not red, it's not blue, it's pink, or it's purple. And you notice that you have the 1.0 and the 1.1, but when you look at them, it's the same thing. Like, I see no difference. Like, it's the same dress. And this is because the easiest way to make back faces for both sides is to duplicate. Like, you have the mesh, and then you duplicate it with Control D, sorry, Shift D. And once it's duplicated in edit mode, you go to mesh, normals, flip. And that way I create the illusion, right, that this object is, let me go into backface culling. If I use backface culling now, nothing is going to be transparent. I can see both the inside and the outside of it. For this particular dress that is so skin tight, this is not going to be important. But again, if you have a cape, or if you have a dress that shows the back a little bit, or well, the inside of the texture, then yes, you probably want to do something of the sort. But back faces, it's its own thing. So it's just so you get an idea of like, why does this have two faces? Oh, don't worry, you can just get rid of one of them, one of the copies, do everything that you want to do, and when you're done, then you can duplicate it and flip it here in edit mode with mesh, normals, flip. But well, this is all just getting into the setup process, right? And like I said, when you work with modded clothes or custom meshes, these are always going to be a lot easier to work with than vanilla stuff. In fact, there is a couple of ways that you can grab a vanilla mesh and prepare it to make it easier to work with before you start upscaling. But I feel like that also requires its own video, which I will try to make hopefully soon. But well, if we continue into the process of upscaling, right, this is where you start actually editing your mesh. So there are many different ways you can go about this. You can literally just scale it down with S in edit mode. So first I scale it down. It already looks pretty good. And then a lot of people try to use sculpt mode. I feel like there are some meshes where using sculpt mode can be good and sometimes even easier for certain things. But I honestly, I guess, first of all, it depends on you and what you're most comfortable with. But the best way to make sure that things don't break, which unfortunately the sculpt mode sometimes tends to, well, some of the tools, let me show you, some of the tools might break or destroy the way that your mesh actually looks. So it's not something that you can get super creative with. So I think that it's easier, the best and easiest way to work with things when you are resizing is to use the proportional editing, which is over here. It's this little circle. So you click it, and at first you won't be able to see it because it's very big. But basically, like if you click here and you press G, you can scroll, use the scroll wheel, and you will be able to see a circle. So again, usually this circle is so big that you won't be able to see it right away. So zoom out if you don't see it. But basically, this circle is going to dictate how much of the mesh is being manipulated, right? So if it's super big, the whole dress is going to move. But if I make it very small, only a few vertices are going to be affected. So you can, when you're doing this, you can turn on the symmetry over the x-axis. So that way, if you move things, in theory, everything on the other side is going to move. However, this dress is not completely symmetrical. So this is not, a full foolproof thing. For a lot of vanilla meshes, it might work. Other things that you can use are maybe a mirror modifier, which should be, where is it? Here in Generate, there's a mirror modifier. But again, this particular mesh is not symmetrical, so it's not going to be very helpful right now. But well, I can just press G and start moving things. I am making very aggressive moves here that I don't recommend. Usually the smaller the movement, the better. You're not going to deform things as much. And well, this is basically like 80% of your time, like just refitting things little by little. And I'm sorry that I'm making like a really crappy job, but I just want to like demonstrate how you're moving the mesh. There are a couple of other tools that can be used for this. And I do have a video showing some of them, so I will just link that if you want to like, if you're like, okay, I kind of got a hang of it, but I want to know what other helpful tools I can use to make my work easier. God, this looks so bad. I'm sorry. So yeah, I'm just going to do this very, very quickly. Now, in some cases, for example, this particular dress was on a flat chest. So if I want to make things look a little bit more, well, bigger for the actual big breasted chest, um, you can use the proportional editing, and then there is also the using some of the sculpting tools very gingerly to try to like shape things a little bit better. But like I said, you have to be very careful. Not all of the tools are going to look great. Some of them are going to give you more trouble than they're worth. But the sculpting tools can work if you are moving from a very flat chest to a bigger chest, or the opposite, from a very big chest to a small chest. Sculpting tools is what helps you give it a little bit more of uh, the real shape that things have. There are many steps here that you can do depending on the mesh, depending on what you're converting to. Um, you can use many different tools for it. So let's pretend that I go over the whole process, right, of refitting. Um, and if you guys want, I will actually do a step-by-step one, but I feel like it's easier if you already understand what the hell is going on. Um, and once you finish, make sure that, first of all of your numbers are correct, right? You don't want to be missing any numbers or repeating numbers. Repeated numbers are going to get deleted. And again, that everything has the end root that corresponds. And once you have this, then you can go here, right click and do select hierarchy. Well, actually, another quick thing worth mentioning is uh, a rule of thumb to avoid clipping is if you can't see it, yeet it. So, for example, the nipples are things that are usually poking through the clothes, and I don't want to like reshape the clothes around the nipples, right? Because that usually doesn't look good. So what I do is I select the body and I delete the nipples. Selecting is also a lot easier when you use the X-ray mode, right? So if you're selecting things with the X-ray mode, you will select more accurately all of the vertices instead of just some of them. So then when I delete by vertices. Can also do by faces, but vertices usually deletes absolutely everything that is selected. And that way I'm not going to have nipples poking through the dress, right? In the other video where I show the tools, I also show how to use the knife tool to make cuts a little more accurate and easier to select and separate. But well, this is basically the chest, and that's it. If I had also legs, the legs would have to have their own. Let me put some legs here so I can reference that. Emperor, small clothes. Okay, so here is the lava legs. Oh, actually, as a tip, for example, this dress is just using the chest, but it's not a bad idea to also bring your legs, because that way you know what the actual full body looks like. So, for example, if I wanted to use just this, the legs were going to clip, right? But now that I brought the legs, I can make sure that everything actually fits around the dress. Right. But when I export things in object mode, because I cannot do this in edit mode, you have the legs separated with their own parts, right? So this is going to be something that I can hide at any point by pressing Shift and then pressing here in the eyes. That way I can just work on the chest whenever I want, and if I need the legs, I can just make them visible again. Other other thing that is important is the weights, because most of the time, if you have issues with your mesh, it's going to be weights, almost always. Weights you can look at by clicking the particular object or mesh and then going into weight paint mode. A lot of people have the impression that you have to weight paint everything. Most of the time that's not the case. Most of the time you can just import the weights from the stuff that you're working on, and then from there you can start editing things. I would say this works great for most things, except things that have skirt bones. So things like tailcoats or dresses, you have to be very careful because the skirt bones are actually really hard to work with. And I don't recommend rewriting the existing ones. So there are a couple of things that you need to learn about that. But again, as a general tip, this dress, for example, is very tight. So I probably just want it to move along with the rest of the body. So that would be both the chest and the legs, right? So just as a very quickly demonstration of how that works, if I want the weights to be copied from both the chest and the legs, I should, first of all, select the chest, then while pressing Shift, select the thighs, and do Shift D to make a copy. I press Enter, and then Control J, so I can, the two parts that I copied are now one, right? I have one complete body here. And once I have this copy, I'll name it here like weights so I can find it easier. I can select the dress, and then here's where the actual weights are in the model. You go to the Object Data Properties, and I'll show them here in weight paint mode. These are the names of the different bones, and each of these bones have some weight assigned to it, right? Usually the red means like it's very heavily influenced by this particular bone. So the lighter it gets, the less influence it has, right? So the names are in Japanese, but there is a very handy Textool's reference sheet that I'll link here, and you can just look up what each of them are, and eventually you become familiar with them. But well, so this is what the weights currently look like, but these were the weights that worked with the previous body. So with the new body, I can just delete all of them. And then in object mode, I'm going to select this new copy with the the chest and the thighs. And while pressing shift, I'm going to also select the dress. And I'm going to go object mode, weight paint, weights, transfer weights. There is this little menu that opens here that says transfer mesh data. And I change the vertex mapping into nearest face interpolated. And then the source layer, I change it to by name. And that adds all of the weights that are in my copy, this body, right? I forgot I deleted the nipple. If you are going to do this, make sure that it's in a complete mesh. This mesh already has a hole in it, so that's not a good idea to copy weights from it, because then I think it will be visible in the dress, but let's see. When I look at the weights that are going to be in the breasts, let me find it. There, well, it's not, I think it's not as visible. But usually there might be like an actual hole in your weights if you are doing that. So make sure that your body is complete when you are copying weights from it. And well, this is like, I copied the weights, and it is not always going to be 100% perfect. This is where we need to try testing with animations and or maybe just checking it in game how it looks, and then we can come here and actually edit things with the different tools that we have here. But again, this is like a very general process, and kind of like find out where everything is type of class. So I'm not really going to go over weights. It should be its own class, honestly. But well, so that is the easiest, and I would say like the main way that most people do weights when they are upscaling. So steal the weights from something else. If not from the body, like let's say that maybe this dress is like a lot wider, like it's not as skin tight. Maybe I can come into Textools and grab a model that is vanilla that is very similar to it. And I know that this dress has skirt bones. So I will be able to use these weights and put it in my fluffier dress and use it, right? So there are a few very smart things you can do with that. But well, let's say that I refitted my outfit. I check the weights. As far as I know, they're fine. I have the correct modifier with the correct end roots in all of these. Oh well, these are the legs that I am not really going to use. And then these are the settings that I normally use when I'm going to export a model. So first I select the hierarchy, then I go into export in file, export as an FBX. And this is very important because if you have some of these settings wrong, it will cause you issues, and your mod will probably not work. So I tend to use this as limit to selected objects because I am only exporting the chest, and if I have other parts like the hands or the feet or whatever, I don't want to export that. Then I'm going to scroll down and uncheck bake animation. Then I'm going to open this drop down with the armature and remove add leaf bones. This one in particular is very important because it can completely mess up your skeleton. And then in geometry, I apply modifiers. In some cases, like maybe if you're working with a dev kit, the instructions of the dev kit will tell you to keep apply modifiers checked. But again, if you're using a dev kit, you have to follow the instructions of the dev kit maker. So some things are not always going to apply. But in this case, since I'm not using a dev kit, I'm just going to remove apply modifiers. I'm going to export the model. And then I will go to, let's say that I'm going to replace the spring dress. So obviously I don't have the textures installed for this particular. I wonder. I feel like maybe I have. Okay, so I am ready. This is what the original model looked like, and I can find here over here the textures of the dress, right? This is what the dress is made of. You have the material. The material is basically, imagine it like the the package of the textures. All of the textures come inside the material. And the different textures that I use are here for the dress. And then if I had other parts for the clothes, they would be listed here as well. But in this case, I only have one material, and usually the material is going to be made of a normal, a mask, and an index. At least that is now the Dawn Trail formula. But this is installed in Midlander, right? And I want to install it for Midlander, female, not male. So I can just use the material that I had already installed. So I can look at it here for reference. If I go into edit model, this button, by the way, is great because it lets you look at how things are set up. So you can reverse engineer a lot of things. So you can see here that the group 0, right, group 0 of the mesh, which is the skin, has assigned this material. In this particular case, Textools now very kindly includes what the path is supposed to be if you're working with Gen 3 or TBSE, or if you're working with Vivo, or if you're working with Vanilla, right? So the skin here has already assigned this. If you're working with Rogadin and Hrothgar, I don't particularly remember the path, but you can find it very easily. If you install an existing mod and you come here to edit the model, you will be able to see what the path is supposed to be. And you can just copy it. If you go into custom, right, it will let you select this because you're supposed to like be entering whatever other path you want. But if I don't remember it, I can just copy it from here and use it wherever else I want. So again, this is for the skin. And then for group 1, I have assigned this material, right? The top B for the Here Midlander male. That's this one. And I have access to the Midlander female as well. So I can just copy these settings basically, like remember that is the material B for Midlander male. I'll just remember that. And then when I go into Midlander female, I will import my model by using the load button. And here I can look for the model. These settings are almost always supposed to go untouched. There are very few reasons why you might want to use one or the other. Particularly this shift imported UVs will, well, it even says there in the hover menu, shift the incoming UV by -1V. If you're importing an old TT2 model, this should be off. So an easy way to explain this is that when you have when you use things for Final Fantasy 14 or models for Final Fantasy 14, and you have a texture, I'm going to just select these are not the ones that I want. Okay, this. So this is the texture for the dress. So here you can see how the UVs of the dress are set up. But usually for Final Fantasy 14, the UVs are not supposed to be on top like this. They're always going to be one square down. So usually they look like this. G, Y, -1, right. So usually this is how the UVs are going to be in Final Fantasy 14. And this button tends to be already set. So even if your UV is like this, Textools is going to automatically move it down here for you, so it's visible in Textools and in the game. But depending when your mesh was made or what the settings are, this can change, or if it doesn't look right, you want to come back and import it with checking it off, experiment one or other options, but usually that's the only one you want to use. There are other reasons why you might want to do this, but for now, let's leave it at that. Now, when you import a model, you'll get some errors. I recommend that if you are asking for help when you are if you find issues while you're trying to do your upscales, please keep in mind the errors, because the errors will almost always narrow down what the problem is. Here in this case, we have mesh had no vertices or triangles, but this is an error that I am getting because, well, actually, did I even save? Here. So sometimes you get some artifacts when you save certain things. So you can see that this dress has like these little triangles are usually a mesh, right? Like the dress, for example. But if you click through them, you'll see that nothing gets selected, like they are blank, basically. So I can just select them and delete them. But since I didn't delete them, the Textools is finding them. And if you see, they have these numbers assigned 0.004. And they are showing up here. And the Textools is telling me, like, these things are empty. Why are they here? I'm going to ignore them, right? So I'm just going to delete them, so at least they don't show up next time that I import the model. And then I got group 1 part 0, and remember that we can find that here. Group 1 part 0, which is the dress. It says vertices had major corrections made to their weight data. This is basically Textool saying, like, these weights are a little bit weird, so I'm going to make some adjustments. The majority of the time, these adjustments are not a big deal. The problem is when it says that this mesh has extremely abnormal weights. Then that means that Textools is just going to reset them completely, and it's not going to save whatever weights you had. You can prevent that when you're working with the weights. You can just here in weight paint mode do weights, limit total, and then weights normalize all, and make sure that this particular window that opens up here, that you uncheck lock active, and that way it's going to apply the normalize to all of the vertex groups. The normalize option is just for the weights to have the values that, let's say, are standard or that are supposed to work with the game engine. It's the best way I can put it. So once you normalize them, these type of errors should either not appear, or at least it would be only this one that says we made some corrections in the weights, but Textools didn't reset them. Like that was not the message that you get anymore, right? And then there is another warning here that says that mesh 0 part 3 has an unusual UV2 data. This can have unexpected results on decal placement or opacity. Was this intended? So this is a little tricky because sometimes this warning can be very important, and we might need to do some things like clone the UV1 into the UV2, or we might need to go into doing some other kinds of adjustments. But in a lot of cases, if you, for example, this was a working mod already for TBSE, so if it worked okay with TBSE and I didn't touch the UV2, I really have no reason to think that this is going to be a problem, normally. So for this particular case, since I know that the mod worked previously, right, I used it with TBSE, then I'm just going to ignore this particular warning. Now, when I close this, you can see that all of the textures are assigned wrong. So I can save the model here, but also I'm realizing that my transaction is still in preparing. So let's repeat this step, but now let's change the transaction. All of these files that we installed during the prepare transaction, I am not going to use. So I'm going to do begin transaction right now. I'm going to put this that I want to make a PMP, which is the Penumbra file. And I'm going to give it a name, test dress, save. Now, all of the changes that I make from now are going to apply. You can cheat a little bit because, you know, this means that my, sure, I'll save it for now. If I go into the Midlander Mail model now, the dress is still there, but it's not saved in my transaction. So because I want to keep this information here in Textools and I want to use the textures that this is going to use, I'm going to save this. And then now in the transaction menu, I can see that the model was saved, right? So now if I import this as a Penumbra model, it's going to also bring this model. But I not so much want it for the model. I think I prefer it for the material because the material has these textures that I'm going to use. So here in the material, I'm going to hit save. And I can see here now that in the transaction, save the material. And if I want just to be safe, I'm also going to save the normal, save the mask, save the index map. So this is only so I can continue working with this, and that all of the changes that I make are going to be saved into a Modpack. Now, going back to the Midlander female body, I'm going to load my model again. And this time, I'm going to actually do Open Editor, because with the Open Editor, I can assign the textures to each of the models. I didn't save the mesh again, so it's just going to repeat the same errors. But well, the group 0, we said this is the skin, right? And if you don't remember, you can just come back here and be like, okay, so group 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Yes, it's all body, right? So now that I have the, now that I'm sure that it's the body, I can just select it here. The lava body uses Bebo skin, so I'm just going to select it here. It's already assigned. And then I go to the group 1, and for the group 1, I'm going to select the Midlander material B, because we said that that's where I installed the dress textures, right? Other things that you can do while you are in the model editor is make sure that all of the parts of the body have the respective attributes. In this case, they didn't have attributes saved in the previous version of this model in this particular group. So I have to add them manually. And that is where renaming the parts can be helpful, because as you can see here, these parts, go away, I want to look at this. These parts save the name that you gave it. So since I already named this 0.0 part elbow, I know that I can just add the attribute for elbow here. And this one is the neck. So this is an attribute from the previous model, so I'm going to remove it because I don't use it for this. And I can add the neck. Then next part has an elbow attribute already assigned, but that's not what I am using it for. This is the number 2. So 0.2 is the wrist. So I'm going to do 0.2 wrist. And the last part is the torso. The torso shouldn't have any attributes. If you have attributes assigned to things that don't need attributes, you will have disappearing parts. So be careful with that. The same if you are using body variants. Body variants will also make certain things disappear. All right, I'm done assigning my textures and my attributes. I do confirm. I close this. I remove this. And I save it. Right now you can see that the dress is the correct color because I have my textures assigned. The body is currently gray because I haven't installed Bebo textures. So it's not super important that you do, but if you want to make sure that everything is working properly, it's not a bad idea to install the Bebo textures, or well, the Bebo Modpack in the prepare transaction thing, so you can see everything there. And from here, technically, I am already done. I can open here the transaction, and I recommend to click keep open after commit, because if I make any mistakes, I want to be able to just change things very quickly and come back. So after this, I do a commit transaction, And then all of these changes that I made are going to be saved into a Modpack, and I can test it in Penumbra. If you remove the check mark, it's going to do the same thing, but it's going to close everything. And if you're going to be coming back and forth and testing stuff, I feel like it's a lot easier to just keep things here open after commit. Um, or if you say, like, you know what, I'm done, I finished, you can just uncheck it, commit after transaction, and it's going to wipe everything. And you need to begin a new transaction in order to begin saving things. But again, if, for example, let's say that in my previous PMP, I saved the Midlander model. Now it's gone, along with the texture, because I closed the transaction. So again, I can just begin the transaction, and I can import the modpack that I already made. But again, it's more work, right? So that's why it's better to have the transaction always with the keep open after commit, so you can continue making changes and it makes everything faster. Now, this is like the bare bones explanation of the basics of how you can start doing this stuff, where some of these things are, what are the different, what do the different numbers and things that you find in Blender are supposed to do, and which ones you use and which ones you don't use. So I hope that, again, you use this as a point of reference, right? More than anything else. It's not meant to be a guide. It's meant to just give you a bit of an introduction to dip your toes on how this works. And hopefully it makes other, well, actual guides a little easier to understand and to follow, or at least it would save you some time and prevent certain basic mistakes. But I do plan to make an actual step-by-step um, um, guide for upscaling. But I feel like it's a little difficult to go into detail when you're also going to do every single step and make sure that things look right. So it would be its own thing for those who feel a little more confident and they rather fuck around and find out, and they don't care so much about terms and things of the like. But hopefully this is helpful to you in some way or another, and I'll see you in the next class. Take care.